Hello, ladies and gents. This is Mr. Vanderpool, and today we're going to be talking about a concept called a comparative advantage. And we are going to go ahead and use this idea of comparative advantage to show how countries are going to specialize when it comes to international trade. So, before we get into this idea of comparative advantage, we're going to talk about a couple of Ricardos. So the first Ricardo is Ricky Ricardo. He's Lucy's Cuban-American husband, drumming on the bongo, babaloo, all that kind of good stuff. All right. By the way, if you're taking notes on the actual PowerPoint slides themselves, you don't need to necessarily take any notes on this slide or the next one. The other Ricardo we're looking at is David Ricardo. He's the English economist who's responsible for promoting comparative advantage as a basis of trade, and he does not have any relation to Ricky Ricardo. All right. So I want to now compare a couple of terms, absolute advantage versus comparative advantage. And you definitely, if you're taking notes on the actual PowerPoint slides, you definitely want to start taking notes here. All right, so absolute advantage. Okay, when somebody has an absolute advantage in doing something, they're just faster, they're more efficient at it. Okay, with absolute advantage, you're looking for the higher number. Who can produce more? Comparative advantage is a little different. When you have the comparative advantage in something, you produce something at a lower opportunity cost. You give up less to produce. So let's say Mr. Vanderpool has to give up 10 apples to make a pie, and let's say you have LeBron James who has to give up one apple to produce a pie. The question would be, who has the comparative advantage in the production of pies? And the answer is LeBron James, because LeBron James only has to give up one apple. I have to give up 10 apples, and so therefore LeBron James has the lower opportunity cost, so therefore he has the comparative advantage. So with comparative advantage, we're really looking for the lower number. Who gives up the least amount to produce? All right, now I want to look at a concept called specialization. And the specialization is producing things according to comparative advantage. So this is what economists have found through various study. They have found that nations will specialize where they have the comparative advantage. They will then trade, and they will both become better off. So let's go over that again. Nations will specialize in making the thing that they have the comparative advantage in. Okay, remember, comparative advantage just means that they have to give up less to produce it. So they specialize where they have the comparative advantage, then they trade, and then through that, both countries are going to become better off. So it's very important that you understand this idea of countries specializing where they have the comparative advantage, trading, and then both becoming better off. Now I want to go ahead and do an example. So let's assume Ricky Ricardo and David Ricardo are going to throw a party in exactly an hour. They've decided on serving homemade pizzas and cakes and assume they have like 15 ovens in their apartment, lots of pots and pans. We're going to use the information in the next slide to determine who should produce what. So this is what we're looking at here. We're looking at David and Ricky. So David Ricardo can make 2 cakes an hour and 6 pizzas an hour. Ricky Ricardo can make 4 cakes an hour and 8 pizzas per hour. So go ahead and take down this chart, and we're going to play around with this chart a little bit. Okay. So, a couple of questions here. Who has the absolute advantage in baking cakes, and who has the absolute advantage in making pizza? And here, remember, with absolute advantage, you're looking for the larger number, who can produce the most. And that's pretty obvious here. Ricky can produce more cakes. Ricky can also produce more pizza. So therefore, Ricky Ricardo has the absolute advantage in both making cakes and making pizza. And why is that? Because 4 cakes is greater than 2 cakes, and 8 pizzas is greater than 6 pizzas. So that's very simple. Who can make the most? Now, we're going to go to the one that's a little bit more tricky, which is comparative advantage. So our question now, we have the same scenario. It says, who has the comparative advantage in baking cakes, and who has the comparative advantage in making pizzas? So what we have to do there is we have to start focusing in on what each person is giving up when they focus in on making one cake or pizza. So let's do that. All right. So I have a chart here, and we have David, and we have Ricky, and we're looking at the amount of cakes they can make per hour and the amount of pizzas they can make per hour. So I want to start off by focusing on who has the comparative advantage in baking cakes. So in order to do this, we want to see what ends up, if David and Ricky focused in on making one cake, how much pizza would they be giving up? So we got to get to them making one cake. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 ends up being 1. And 6 divided by 2 ends up being 3. So when David focuses in on making one cake, he gives up 3 pizzas. Now let's look at Ricky. We've got to get him down to 1. So we're going to divide by 4. So that becomes 1. And this becomes, this number becomes 8 divided by 4, which is 2. So when Ricky focuses in on making one cake, he is going to give up 2 pizzas. So who has the comparative advantage in cakes? The person that gives up less pizza to make cake, and that person is Ricky, because he is only giving up 2 pizzas to make a cake, while David is giving up 3 pizzas to make one cake. All right, so that was looking at the comparative advantage in baking cakes. Now, let's look at the comparative advantage for pizzas. So now we want to go ahead and get down to one pizza here, and we'll start with David. So we're going to divide by 6, which makes this end up being 1. Divide by 6 here. 2 divided by 6 is 1/3. So by David focusing in on making one pizza, he gives up 1/3 of a cake. Let's look at Ricky. Ricky, we got to focus in on what he gives up when he makes one pizza. So we're going to divide by 8 here to get him down to 1. Divide by 8 here. 4 divided by 8 is 1/2. So therefore, when Ricky focuses on making one pizza, he gives up half a cake. So then the question is, who has the comparative advantage in making pizza? Who gives up the least? Ricky gives up half. David half a cake. David gives up 1/3 of a cake. So therefore, David is going to have the comparative advantage when it comes to making pizza. because he gives up less. All right, so once again here, Ricky is going to give up 2 pizzas to bake a cake. David gives up 3 pizzas in order to bake a cake, so therefore Ricky has the comparative advantage in the baking of cakes. David, it cost him 1/3 of a cake to make a pizza. It costs Ricky 1/2 of a cake to bake a pizza. So therefore David is going to have the comparative advantage in making pizza. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our next video.